My wife is a great shopper, and she does a whole coupon thing with the ads, and she recently went out and bought like 6 hams around the holiday season, and we're going to be doing a whole bunch of hams on this video. And hams are a great thing to have for your freeze-drying inventory, primarily because they're already cooked. You really don't have to do much with hams other than to slice them up. And we're going to go ahead and process this ham. Now, I have a confession to make. This is a remake. I was doing this video and got halfway through it when I accidentally deleted the beginning of this video. So you're going to see me referring to 2 hams in the video when there are no longer 2 hams. So I had to go out and buy this ham, not on sale, to replicate what we're going to be talking about. So that's a bad thing on my part, good thing on my wife's part. So we're going to go ahead and process this ham so I can show you what I was talking about. So anyway, this is a butt portion ham, which is probably one of the most common, and we're going to go ahead and take the wrapper off of this. We're going to go ahead and cut it up, and I'm going to show you the 4 different cuts of meat that can come off a ham that's important to know if you're going to be freeze drying a ham. So without any further ado, we're going to go ahead and prepare this thing, and I'm going to show you the 4 different cuts of meat. The first thing you want to do when preparing your ham is remove as much fat as possible, and that's probably where the saying came from of trimming the fat. Fat has a problem in freeze drying because fat will not freeze dry. And even when using an oxygen absorber, fat will cause a problem with freeze drying. Fat will not freeze dry, and even in a low oxygen atmosphere, unrendered fat will cause hydrogen sulfide and methane gases, which is not good for your food storage. And hydrogen sulfide gas is a marker gas for food spoilage. I found out the hard way later on in my freeze drying endeavors that if you do not remove as much oxygen as possible, either by using the right size of oxygen absorber or vacuum packing your food, years down the road, your food is going to have some problem with spoilage. So remove as much fat as possible. The fat on food is not a good thing. That is the first category you want to get rid of. So you really want to get rid of as much fat as possible by trimming it as much as you can. And whatever fat you can't get rid of, you want to render it so it won't spoil your food. I broke down this ham quite a bit. I want to show you the different kind of cuts that you can get from a ham, and the ones you can freeze dry by themselves and the ones that you shouldn't. Now, we have this kind of cut of meat right here, which is really, really lean. There's hardly any fat in this. And this is the kind of, you might want to call this a ham steak, but there's hardly no fat whatsoever. I mean, there's a slight marbling in this ham. And this is the kind of ham that you can just leave as is or cube it and go ahead and freeze dry it. When I freeze dry ham, I like cutting it into cubes. I can get more into a tray. Some people will like to leave it like this, but the only problem with this is when you freeze dry it, it can break really easy. So I just cube it, but whatever you want to do. Now, I have this piece of ham right here, and this is kind of a good example. Right here, I have this piece of kind of a piece of fat coming through here. I got some fat marbling coming through here. I have some of the skin here, and you can see over here I have some fat here. Well, I can come through here. I can cut that fat off right there, cut off the top there, and I have some fat coming right here. So I can cut all the fat off of this, and now this piece is really nice and lean, so I can throw that over on my lean pile. Now I have this piece of ham right here. If I take a look at this, this is mostly meat, has a little bit of fat. So this is going to be my mostly meat, a little bit of fat pile, which is going to go right here. And then let's see, I can take this piece right here, and I can show you this piece of meat. This meat right here is mostly fat, but it has a little bit of meat in it. This is the third category. So I have lean, mostly meat with a little bit of fat, mostly fat with a little bit of meat, and then I have this pile right here, which is mostly fat. Now the mostly fat, if you really want to, you can make this into candles, you can make soap out of it, or whatever you want to do with that. Now the mostly lean, you can just go ahead and put this into the freeze dryer and not worry about it. This type of meat, the mostly meat with a little bit of fat, this is a kind of food that you can put in into recipes like scalloped potatoes and such that you can just use with cooking and not have to worry too much about. This type of meat you do not want to freeze dry. You'll get yourself into trouble. Now the type of meat right there, the third category that has mostly fat, this category that's mostly fat with a little bit of meat is the type of ham that I will usually put into soups. And the reason I put this category in the soups is because I'm going to boil this ham and it's going to get nice and hot. Boiling the ham tenderizes the ham, which is going to be great for a soup, but it's also going to render the fat in this ham. And once the soup is done, all this fat is going to come up to the surface when I cool the soup, and then I can scrape that fat and oil off the soup and dispose of it. So the category or the ham that has a lot of the fat to it is the ham I will reserve for making soups. And so I'm going to freeze dry the lean ham just as it is. With the ham with a little bit of fat, we're going to make scalloped potatoes. The ham that has a lot of fat, we're going to make ham and bean soup. And then the fat right here, I'm not going to try to make candles or anything else with it. I'm just going to toss this for now. A lot of the preppers out there, they'll hold on to this and they can make all sorts of stuff, but I just don't have the patience or the time or the ambition right now to try to process that. So I'm going to go ahead and finish processing the rest of this piece of ham right here and put it into the different categories, and we'll go from there. Now, these two categories, the ham that has the fat on it, don't try to freeze dry it because you're just going to get yourself into a world of hurt down the road. When you freeze dry and preserve the ham with any type of fat on it, now whether you use a Mylar bag or you use a jar, when you use an oxygen absorber, it does not take the environment down to a zero oxygen environment. It gets pretty darn close, but it does not get to zero. Any amount of oxygen with fat in it is going to cause your fat to go rancid. And when that happens, it's going to generate hydrogen sulfide gas and methane. So don't try to trick yourself into doing it. Just avoid it as much as possible. The only way you can treat this is you need to render the fat. And that means you're going to have to cook the fat at least 145 degrees for a long period of time to render it, to be able to do anything with it. Stick with the lean ham if you want to just do it by itself. Ham and bacon like that, you can freeze dry it, but you have to render the fat first. So anyway, on with the video. We've removed all the meat from the bone, and this is an option. You can use the bone or not, or you can just give it to the dog. But there's a lot of flavor, and there's still a lot of meat on this bone, and this is an option if you want to use it for your soup or not. I like to boil the bone down in the soup to give it some extra flavor. So you can go ahead and separate the joint to make it a little bit easier and get some more flavor out of it. So we're going to go ahead and put this into the pot and use it as we make the soup. So we're going to go ahead and add the ingredients and go through the recipe on what goes into the soup itself. We're going to start out with 8 cups of water and our ham bones. And we're going to go ahead and set these on to boil. And while this is boiling, we're going to go ahead and cut up our vegetables and our ham and let this boil for about 15-20 minutes while we do all our prep work on our other ingredients. I have my ham bones here, and these have boiled for about 20 minutes. And we're going to go through and we're going to go ahead and pick off all the loose meat that's on our ham bone and return any loose meat back into the pot, and the ham bones will go back in the pot also. And then we want to cut any pieces of large meat into smaller pieces, and we want to make sure we don't have any gristle that's going to be in with the meat here. Now we have all of our ingredients here. Now we have 4 cups of ham here, and this is a ham that can have a little bit of extra fat in with it. Remember, we had like 4 categories that came off of our ham. We had really lean ham, we had ham with some fat, we had fat with some ham, and then we had a lot of fat. But this is a ham that can have a lot of fat with it because all this fat is going to get rendered as we make the soup. So this is where we can actually have some fatty ham in with the soup that's going to get rendered and will be just fine. So we have the 4 cups of ham, we have 2 cups of roughly diced carrots, and we have 1 cup celery, we have 2 cups of onions, and we have 2 tablespoons of garlic, and we have 2 cans of northern white beans, and these have been washed and drained because usually the beans come with this kind of a thick kind of syrup that I really don't care for, so I usually wash these with cold water and then drain them. And then we have a teaspoon of salt, a teaspoon of white pepper, and a tablespoon of dry mustard powder, and then I have 4 bay leaves right here. And so we're going to go ahead and add this to the pot and go ahead and get our soup going. We're going to return our ham bone back to the water. Then we're going to go ahead and add our 4 cups of ham, 2 cups of carrots, a cup of celery, 2 cups of onions, and these are finely diced onions, finely diced garlic, 2 cans of white northern beans, a teaspoon of salt, a teaspoon of white pepper, a tablespoon of dry mustard, and 4 bay leaves. We're going to go ahead and just mix this all up. And we're going to bring this to a boil. And then once it comes to a boil, we're going to go ahead and let it simmer. And then the determining factor of when this is done is when the carrots become tender. The soup is done, and I removed it from the heat, and I've already taken out the bones, and I've accounted for the 4 bay leaves. Now, if you happen to miss a bay leaf, that's okay. In our family, if you find a bay leaf in your soup, that is the lucky bay leaf, and you get $1. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and put that aside. Now, at this point, there's 2 ways of doing this. You can go ahead and freeze dry the soup as it is, which is just fine, but you're going to have a certain amount of extra fat. Now, in cooking, fat is flavor. If you're going to freeze dry the soup as it is, I strongly recommend that you put it into either Mylar bags, which I prefer, or into a glass jar, but it needs to have an oxygen absorber, and you need to vacuum pack it. You need to be very, very careful this way because you need to absolutely, positively remove all the oxygen, because over time, if there is any if there is any oxygen, the oxygen can cause the fat to decay faster, and your food just won't taste as well in the future during the zombie apocalypse. So the other option is to remove the fat, and that's what I'm going to show you to do right now. To remove the fat, you're going to need a bowl and a colander, and we need to remove the liquids from the solids. So we're going to go ahead and pour all of this into a colander. And so we have all the solids on the top. And this is all the liquids underneath. So we're going to get a nice narrow pitcher. This is a ½ gallon. And we're going to pour all the liquids into a pitcher. Now I'm going to let this cool down because right now this is piping hot. Once it's cool, I'm going to stick this in the refrigerator, and as this cools, all the fat is going to come up to the top, and we're going to skim the fats off and remove the fat, and then return the liquids back into the soup. This is our chilled liquid part of our soup, and I'm just going to go in here real carefully and skim off the top here. It's almost like a skin. And remove the fat, and there's probably about a ¼ inch on top of here. And like I said, you know, fat is flavor, but this can be replaced when you reconstitute it. You can just put some olive oil back into your soup when you reconstitute it to add that full body flavor back into it. But like I said, if you want to go ahead and vacuum pack it, you could probably leave the fat in there. It also depends on what kind of diet you're on, if you want to keep the fat or not. It's a choice you'll have to make. But a lot of this fat that was on the ham was rendered when it was boiled, and so it will be suitable for freeze drying. Okay, so this is a liquid portion of our soup, and this is a solid portion of our soup. We're not going to combine them at this time, but we're going to go ahead and put the solid portion into the Harvest Right trays and get them ready to either put into the freeze dryer or into the freezer. Now I prefer to pre-freeze all my food, so I'm going to put this back into the trays and pre-freeze it. And I have a kind of a special way of doing that, and I'm going to go ahead and show you. I have equal amounts of solids in my Harvest Right trays and equal amounts of the liquids in these measuring cups. One thing you want to make sure is when you divide the liquids up, you stir the liquids before you divide them to make sure that all the particulates that often settle down at the bottom are mixed in equally. And I also have this trough going down the middle of the trays so that when you put the trays into your Harvest Right freeze dryer or into your freezer, which I'm going to do, and you can pour your liquids down this trough, and your liquids will flow down the trough and then absorb into both sides of your tray. If you don't have the trough, then sometimes it will happen your liquid will just back up and kind of spill over the side before they have a chance to get down to the end. I found this to be the best way of dealing with really thick and chunky soups like this ham and bean soup. I did put this into the freezer and pre-freeze it, and then into the freeze dryer. The next dish we're going to cook with our ham is a classic scallop potato recipe, and this is from the 1968 Betty Crocker cookbook. This is a really easy recipe because you don't need to make a roux or a white sauce. And so this recipe, I'm actually going to be doubling it. And so the original recipe calls for 2 pounds of potatoes, and right here I have a little bit over 4 pounds potatoes. And that calls for a 1/4 cup of finely chopped onions, and I have a half a cup, and that calls for 3 tablespoons of flour. And in this case, I have 6 tablespoons of flour, and because of my wife, this is gluten-free flour. And then I have 2 teaspoons of salt for the original recipe, but in my case, it's 2 teaspoons of salt. And it calls for a 1/4 teaspoon of pepper. I'm just going to go ahead and shake pepper out of a dispenser here. And then it calls for a 1/4 cup of butter. And so I have a full stick of butter right here. And then it calls for 1½ cups of milk. And this milk has to be heated up to the point of almost being scalded. And I'm going to have to do this shortly. And then, of course, we have our ham, which I shredded up, and we're going to work with that in just a moment. This recipe for scalloped potatoes involves 4 layers. So we're going to put down each layer, and then we're going to sprinkle the onions and the flour and the salt and the pepper and the butter on each layer and just build it up. So no white sauce is required, no roux. It's just sprinkle each layer until you have 4 layers, and then that's done. It's easy peasy. I have my grease dish ready, and I'm going to put my first layer of potatoes down and then all the other ingredients. And then the onions. I got to pace myself because I can only use a 1/4 of these at a time. And then the flour, once again, only a 1/4 at a time. And then the salt. Pepper. And then the butter. And then the ham. So this is the first layer. I just need to repeat this 3 more times and I'll be done. For the final layer, we just put down some potatoes on top, and then we take our scalded milk and we just pour the scalded milk on top of everything. And remember, this is twice the amount of scalded milk. And I have my oven on 350 degrees preheating. And this is going to go in the oven for 30 minutes covered, and then uncovered it will bake for an additional 60 minutes. So all together we're looking at 90 minutes total bake time. That's a long time for this. So all the scalded milk is in here. Then we're going to take the remaining onions and sprinkle that on top. And then take some butter, and we're just going to dot the butter on top as well. Then we're going to put some salt on it, and pepper. And this is ready for the oven, and we'll see how it comes out an hour and a half from now. 90 minutes later, here we have fresh out of the oven and very, very hot. So we're going to dish into this and see what we have. I don't know if you can see the steam coming off of here, but there is plenty of steam. So we're going to check to see the cook on the potatoes here. It's been my experience that sometimes the potatoes on this particular dish needs a long time to cook, and it went into the oven for 90 minutes. potatoes are really tender, and this is tasting really good. So we're going to be using this for tonight's dinner with some vegetables, and then the rest of this I will go ahead and freeze dry along with my ham and bean soup, and then we'll go ahead and package this up. But this came out really well. I'm pleased with it. Like I said, you can use regular flour on this. I chose to make this gluten-free for my wife, and so this is just one of the many things you can do with a ham. This is my ham and bacon soup right out of the freeze dryer. So you can kind of see where I had the solids on this side, and through the center is where the broth went. And so this is ready to put in the bags and to bag up. So this is all ready to go. And this is my scalloped potatoes with ham. And this came out to be really good. You can see there was quite a bit of shrinkage. And one thing you want to make sure that there's not going to be any sharp edges. The potatoes are still quite soft, and so there's no danger of the potatoes causing any holes in the Mylar bags. So I have the soup and I got the potatoes here. So this is ready to bag up and put into my inventory. So I have the cubed ham, which is already done. I have the potatoes, I have the soup. So this is just 3 ways you can take care of a nice piece of ham, and it just gives you some ideas what you can do with it. My wife is a great shopper, and she buys this meat when it goes on sale around the holidays, and that's the best time to buy it and best time to freeze dry it, and you can save lots of money by doing it that way. I hope you enjoyed this session on ham, and I hope you learned something. I appreciate your time, and as always, please subscribe and go forth and freeze dry the world, and you'll have plenty of food to eat.